This is the news we never wanted to hear. Phil Robertson, the fearless, tough-as-nails patriarch of Duck Dynasty, has been hit with a life-changing, heartbreaking diagnosis. And let me tell you, it's shaking the entire Robertson family to its core. For decades, Phil has been the backbone of his family, the unshakable leader, the man who built an empire from nothing. But now, everything has changed. This isn't just another hunting trip gone wrong or a controversy that'll blow over. This is serious. Phil has spent his whole life fighting battles, poverty, addiction, scandals. But this might be his toughest fight yet. So, what exactly is going on? What does this tragic diagnosis mean for Phil's future? And how is his family handling the news? Stick around, because we're breaking it all down, right now. Phil Robertson's wild journey to success. We've seen Phil Robertson tackle just about everything, running a business, leading a family, and even surviving a few controversies along the way. But now, he's facing something he never saw coming. You probably know Phil Robertson as the duck-calling, Bible-preaching, no-nonsense patriarch of Duck Dynasty, but sometimes, even the strongest people have to deal with situations that are just as tough. But looking back at Phil's journey to where he is right now, it's quite evident that he's been through more than enough stormy weather to prepare him for what's coming. Phil wasn't always the strong bearded legend we see today. As a matter of fact, his journey to success was anything but easy. From growing up dirt poor in the Louisiana swamps to nearly throwing it all away with his wild lifestyle, let's not forget the countless scandals. It's safe to say this man has been through it all. Before the fame, before the fortune, and way before the television cameras, Phil Robertson was just a country boy trying to survive. Born on April 24, 1946, in Vivian, Louisiana, Phil was raised in a tiny shack with no electricity, no plumbing, and no luxuries. Just a whole lot of mud and mosquitoes. That's right, Phil wasn't born with a silver spoon in his mouth. His family was dirt poor, and they lived off the land. Hunting, fishing, and farming weren't just hobbies. They were actually necessities. Phil once said, "We were so poor as kids. I didn't even see a bathtub, running water, hot water, or commode. We didn't have any of that. We started with a humble log house, milk cow, and garden, raised our own food, killed a hog every year in the fall, and had the meat hanging up in the smokehouse. That was our childhood." But here's the kicker. Even though they had nothing, Phil and his siblings never went hungry. Why? Because Phil became a master outdoorsman at a young age, learning to trap and hunt like a pro. That skill would eventually make him millions, but we'll get to that in a bit. Now, if you thought Phil was just a country boy with a shotgun, think again. This man was actually a football star back in the day. He was so talented that he earned a football scholarship to Louisiana Tech University, where he became the starting quarterback. And guess what? His backup quarterback was none other than Terry Bradshaw. Yep, the same Terry Bradshaw who went on to become a Super Bowl-winning National Football League legend. But here's where things get interesting. While most guys would have done anything for a shot at the National Football League, Phil had zero interest in all that fame and fortune. He didn't want to be stuck in stadiums when he could be hunting ducks and living off the land and nature the way he loved to. Even Terry Bradshaw spoke about how much Phil was in love with nature, saying, "Phil Robertson loved hunting more than he loved football. He'd come to practice directly from the woods, squirrel tails hanging out of his pockets, duck feathers on his clothes. Clearly, he was a fine shot, so no one complained too much." So, in the most Phil Robertson move ever, he walked away from football to follow his true passion, hunting and the great outdoors. But little did he know that decision would lead to one of the biggest outdoor brands in history. But let's not sugarcoat it. Phil wasn't always the God-fearing family man we see today. In fact, he went through a very dark period before turning his life around. We're talking about excessive drinking, bar fights, broken relationships, and a whole lot of bad decisions. That's right. Phil actually almost lost everything: his family, his business, and even himself, before he finally turned his life around. Let's rewind back to the late 60s. Phil Robertson was young, ambitious, and married to his high school sweetheart, Miss Kay. They had met when they were just teenagers, growing up in the small town of Vivian, Louisiana. Sounds like the perfect love story, right? Well, not exactly, because Phil had a wild side, and once he got a taste of freedom, things started spiraling fast. He was supposed to be building a life with Kay, but instead, he got caught up in partying, drinking, and making all the wrong choices. And the worst part? Miss Kay saw it all happen right in front of her eyes. At first, Phil's drinking started out as casual, a few beers here and there after hunting. However, before long, the man was drinking like it was a full-time job. He wasn't just partying on the weekends, he was living at the bars. He even opened his own bar so he could drink and make money at the same time. But instead of running a successful business, Phil's bar became a place of total destruction. There were fights, arrests, and nights that ended in complete chaos, and it wasn't long before Phil was becoming someone completely unrecognizable. And it wasn't just his wife, Miss Kay, who suffered. His children barely saw their father due to this addiction, and it was completely heartbreaking. Miss Kay once said, "Phil was the worst of the worst back then. He was well on his way to jail or an early grave. I knew that for him to change, it would take a miracle." Miss Kay is definitely one of the strongest women out there. She stood by Phil longer than most people would have, till the very day he suddenly had a wake-up call. You know the Robertsons are big on faith, but did you know that Phil wasn't always a believer? In fact, during his darkest years, he had completely turned away from God. But his wife? She never stopped praying for him. And one day, her prayers were answered. While Phil was at rock bottom, he met a pastor who sat him down and told him the truth he didn't want to hear: that he was going to lose everything completely, his wife and his children, if he didn't let God change him. And that conversation changed everything. For the first time, Phil actually listened. He realized he didn't want to end up alone, drunk, and forgotten. He wanted his family back. He wanted to be a good father. He wanted to build something that mattered. So, he gave his life to God, got baptized, quit drinking, and completely transformed himself. And when we say transformed, we mean he went from being a bar-fighting, whiskey-drinking outlaw to the God-fearing, family-loving man we see today. And let's be real, Phil has his wife, Miss Kay, to thank for this. He once said, "Miss Kay could have divorced me, could have thrown me to the wolves." She didn't, though. Instead, she prayed for me. And when I realized how miserable I was, when I asked her to take me back, she first took me to the preacher, Bill Smith. He helped me to see how broken my life was, how wrecked I was with sin. With his wild days behind him, Phil got laser-focused on what he truly loved doing, and that was hunting ducks. But there was one problem: building an empire, the birth of Duck Commander. If there's one thing Phil Robertson knows better than anyone, it's ducks. The man could practically speak duck language, but there was one problem that kept bothering him. The duck calls that were sold in stores back then were complete garbage. They didn't sound anything like real ducks, and Phil knew that hunters were losing prime opportunities because of it. According to Phil's son, Jace, the brilliant idea began one day in 1972 when his father was hunting on the Arkansas-Louisiana state line at Moss Lake. When his buddy told him he ought to manufacture the call because the ducks like them so much, he took that advice, and in true Phil fashion he thought, if nobody else can do it right, I'll do it myself. And just like that, the idea of the famous and iconic Duck Commander was born. Initially, Phil said his wife and friends were quite hesitant about his obsession with building a business in duck calls. As a matter of fact, Phil once recalled a few of his college friends visiting him in the early 1970s, and they said to him, "Robertson, you've got a master's degree in education, and you're out here fishing and talking about duck calls?" Of course, at the time, Phil didn't have a fancy office. He didn't have a business plan. He didn't even have investors. But what he did have was a tiny shed behind his house and a relentless obsession with making the perfect duck call. Using wood, plastic, and pure determination, Phil spent months designing his first ever duck call. He wanted it to sound exactly like a real duck, and when he finally nailed it, it was game over for the competition. This duck call wasn't just good, it was a game changer. But let's be real. Just because you invent something great doesn't mean people will buy it, especially when you're just some bearded guy from Louisiana with almost zero business experience. But Phil, he had something better than experience. He had hustle. With boxes of duck calls packed in his truck, Phil hit the road and started selling them door to door at every sporting goods store he could find. And guess what? The hunting community loved it. Word spread fast, and soon, hunters across Louisiana and beyond were begging for Duck Commander calls. Now, here's where things really start to take off. For years, Duck Commander was just a small, family-run business. Phil made the calls, and his wife, Miss Kay, helped keep things running. But it wasn't until Phil's son, Willie Robertson, stepped in that things went to the next level. Willie, unlike his dad, wasn't just a hunter. He was a businessman. He saw that Duck Commander had huge potential, but Phil was still running things like it was a small-town shop. So, Willie came in and transformed Duck Commander into a massive brand. With Willie leading the company, Duck Commander started expanding. They got into major retailers like Walmart, Academy Sports, and Bass Pro Shops. And suddenly, the business was making millions. And just when you thought things couldn't get bigger, the family got the life-changing opportunity of Duck Dynasty. By 2012, Duck Commander was already a huge success. But when A&E came knocking with an idea for a reality show about the Robertson family, everything changed. At first, the family wasn't sure about it. And that's not all surprising, considering the kind of man Phil Robertson is. After all, he did give up a shot at football money and fame for hunting, but A&E saw something special, the perfect mix of humor, heart, and that good old Robertson family drama. So, in March 2012, Duck Dynasty premiered, and it blew up overnight. Within 2 seasons, Duck Dynasty became the biggest reality show on cable television. Why? Because people loved the Robertsons. They weren't like the flashy Hollywood reality stars. Nope, they were real, funny, and completely unapologetic about their faith and lifestyle. Fans couldn't get enough of Phil's no-nonsense wisdom, Willie's business smarts, Uncle Si's hilarious one-liners, Miss Kay's home-cooked meals, and of course the family's crazy antics and duck hunting adventures. The show pulled in over 11 million viewers, making it one of the most watched reality series of all time. The show also earned $80 million in advertising sales for the first 9 months of 2013, and the merchandise generated another $400 million in revenue. Can you imagine that? This meant that the Robertsons cashed in big time. Thanks to Duck Dynasty, Duck Commander went from being a popular hunting brand to a full-blown empire. And Phil, the man who started it all in a tiny shed, went from barely making ends meet to being a multi-millionaire. All because he followed his passion and never gave up. But even with all that money and fame, there are certain things that Phil Robertson hasn't been able to protect himself from. Some controversies that have rocked the Robertson family and caused a stir in the media. Phil Robertson's faith and biggest controversies. Phil Robertson isn't just a duck call genius or a reality television star. He's a husband, father, grandfather, and a man of deep, unshakable faith. And guess what? His personal life is just as fascinating as his business empire. If there's one thing that defines Phil Robertson's personal life, it's his faith in God, and he's never afraid to speak his mind when it comes to religion. He's one of the most outspoken Christians in America, and he doesn't really care if it makes people uncomfortable. Phil Robertson's faith has made headlines more than once. He's been criticized for his strong opinions, and some people even tried to cancel him because of his beliefs. But does Phil care? Well, not one bit. One of the biggest controversies surrounding his faith happened in December 2013 when he gave an interview to GQ magazine that nearly got him kicked off Duck Dynasty. In the interview, Phil was asked about his religious beliefs and his views on sin. And in true Phil fashion, he did not hold back. He quoted Bible verses and expressed his traditional Christian views, particularly on the queer community and morality. He compared certain behaviors to sinful lifestyles and stated that he believed in following what the Bible says, no matter what society thinks. He paraphrased a biblical passage from 1 Corinthians by saying, "Don't be deceived. Neither the adulterers, the idolaters, the male escorts, the queer offenders, the greedy, the drunkards, the slanderers, or the swindlers, they won't inherit the kingdom of God. Don't deceive yourself. It's not right." The backlash was heavy and immediate. The media exploded. Queer community advocacy groups called his statements offensive and unkind, and in a bid to save the show, A&E quickly suspended him from Duck Dynasty. Here's where things get interesting. Fans were furious, but not at Phil. Instead, millions of people rallied behind him, arguing that he was simply expressing his religious beliefs and quoting the Bible directly. Even though A&E suspended him, the backlash against the network was so strong that they just had to reinstate him just 9 days later. And would you believe that Phil never apologized? He made it clear that he wasn't trying to attack anyone personally, but he also wasn't going to compromise his faith to make people comfortable. He eventually released a statement that read, "My mission today is to go forth and tell people about why I follow Christ, and also what the Bible teaches. And part of that teaching is that women and men are meant to be together. However, I would never treat anyone with disrespect just because they are different from me. We are all created by the Almighty, and like Him, I love all of humanity. We would all be better off if we loved God and loved each other." And this very moment cemented Phil Robertson as one of the most unapologetic Christian voices in America, whether people agreed with him or not. But if you thought the GQ scandal was bad, well, think again, because Phil found himself in hot water again for comments about segregation and the Jim Crow era. In a 2014 interview, Phil shared his memories of growing up in Louisiana before the Civil Rights Movement, saying that he never personally saw black people being mistreated back then. He claimed that, in his experience, black workers seemed happy before the government got involved with welfare and civil rights policies. His words were, "I never, with my eyes, saw the mistreatment of any black person. Not once. Where we lived was all farmers. The blacks worked for the farmers. I hoed cotton with them. They were godly. They were happy. No one was singing the blues." Now, you can already know how this went over. Critics immediately slammed Phil for ignoring the realities of racial discrimination, while others defended him, saying he was just sharing his personal experience. Phil, in response, made it clear that he wasn't trying to downplay racism, just that he personally didn't witness it growing up. Still, the controversy left a mark, adding to his reputation as one of the most divisive reality stars in America. But that's not all. There's more. In 2015, Phil gave a wild speech at a conservative event where he talked about America's moral decline. But instead of just preaching about faith, he painted a very graphic picture of what happens when people don't follow God's laws. He went into detail about how diseases transmitted through intimacy were ruining the country, and how if people just stuck to biblical values, none of this would be happening. He said, "If a man marries a woman, and neither of you has it, and you keep your intimacy between the two of you, you're not ever going to get these diseases." The media immediately jumped all over it, calling his speech fear-mongering, offensive, and just plain weird. And as usual, Phil didn't care one bit. But perhaps the most shocking controversy to ever rock Phil and the entire Robertson family was a discovery that looked like a plot twist straight out of a soap opera. In 2020, at the age of 74, Phil Robertson got the shock of his life. He had a long-lost daughter he never knew about. Her name was Phyllis, and she had no idea she was a Robertson until she took a DNA test and started connecting the dots. So, how exactly did this happen? Well, let's take it back to Phil's younger, wilder years, before he turned his life around and found faith. During that time, Phil was drinking, partying, and living recklessly. And as it turns out, somewhere along the way, he fathered a child without ever knowing it. And all it took was a DNA test to confirm this long-lost truth. But here's the amazing part. When she told the Robertsons, they welcomed her with open arms. Phyllis was embraced immediately by her new brothers, Alan, Jace, Willie, and Jep. And today, she's an official part of the Duck Dynasty family. Talk about a family reunion for the history books. But despite the numerous controversies, Phil has managed to maintain his strong demeanor in the face of the media. Well, not until the latest discovery about his health. Phil Robertson's scary medical battles. One thing most people don't realize about Phil is the sad fact that he has been through some serious health battles. Although he constantly appears tough as nails to fans and the general public, behind the cameras, the man has been going through some serious struggles with his health. And we're not talking about just a little cold here and there. We're talking about extremely serious medical issues that had his family seriously worried and heartbroken. And just recently, he just got hit with yet another heartbreaking diagnosis. But let's start with the mystery illness that left Phil feeling weak, tired, in pain, and totally unlike himself. For a man who has spent his entire life hunting, fishing, and living off the land, Phil has always been super strong. However, suddenly, he started noticing something wasn't right. At first, he tried to ignore it, because, let's be real, Phil Robertson isn't exactly the type to go running to the doctor over a little fatigue. But it just kept getting worse, and he finally gave in and went to the doctor. And let's just say, the diagnosis was something he never expected. Phil was suffering from a rare blood disorder that, according to his son Willie, seems to be causing his body to produce too much blood, which makes his blood thicker and has led to suspected mini-strokes. What makes the blood disorder really bad is the fact that it has also been causing him different health issues that are just as terrifying. The family, in an episode of their podcast titled Unashamed with the Robertson Family, said, "Phil's not doing well. He's not able to do much, and he's just hurting. He's literally unable to sit down and have a conversation." To make matters worse, Phil has also just been diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's disease, a progressive neurological disorder that affects memory and cognitive function. And this just makes it even harder for him to cope with the other health issues. At first, they thought maybe he was just tired or stressed, or maybe it was just his blood disorder acting up again. But then, things got worse. He started forgetting conversations they had just had a few hours earlier. He lost track of time and would forget what day it was, and he had trouble remembering names and faces, even of close friends. And that's when the family knew something serious was happening. They visited the hospital, and that's when they got the heartbreaking diagnosis. For those who don't know, Alzheimer's is a brain disease that slowly destroys memory and thinking skills. Over time, it gets worse, and eventually, even basic tasks like talking, walking, or recognizing loved ones can become difficult. The worst part is the fact that it can't be cured. And hearing those words hit the family hard. Phil has always been the strongest man in the room, the one leading the family, giving advice, telling stories, and preaching the gospel. And now, his mind was slowly slipping away. His son Jace further revealed that just a few days before that podcast episode was recorded, Phil actually went duck hunting with his sons, but he didn't even fire a shot or say much. To make matters worse, they disclose that Phil also has an enlarged spleen pushing on his stomach, which has sapped his appetite. In addition to all this, Phil's wife, Kay, is battling mobility issues stemming from her broken foot. The family says the couple is in a very bad way at the moment, but has at least occupied themselves with hobbies and reading the Bible. However, what broke most people's hearts about the announcement was when Jace said, "What we're able to share is that outside of some supernatural intervention, there's no cure for what he has." The family has also observed that Phil's condition varies daily, with some days being better than others. However, the overall trajectory has been challenging. The good thing is that despite these health struggles, Phil remains eager to continue participating in family activities, particularly their podcast. The big question now is, how is he handling his health struggles? What does his daily life look like now? And is he really ready for whatever comes next? Well, if there's one thing we've learned about Phil Robertson, it's that nothing can keep this man down. After decades of controversy, shocking family revelations, and now health scares, you'd think he'd be ready to slow down and leave the things he's passionate about. But nope, Phil is still himself. He's living life on his own terms, keeping his faith strong, and spending time with his ever-growing family. Let's be real. Most people would be absolutely terrified after facing the kind of health scares he has. But this is Phil Robertson we're talking about. He doesn't exactly live in fear. He lives in faith. To him, these health battles aren't something to worry about. They're just another test of faith. He believes that God is in control, and no matter what happens, he's ready for it. That doesn't mean he ignores his health, though. Oh no. After the mini-stroke scare, Phil has actually started taking better care of himself. Reports have it that he cut back on certain foods and exercises more. And he keeps his mind sharp by staying busy with his podcast, sermons, and family life. Alzheimer's may not have a cure, but doctors say that keeping the brain active can help slow it down. So Phil is still reading his Bible every day, still joining family discussions, and still telling his stories, even if sometimes he forgets he already told them. But the biggest thing that keeps him going? His faith in God. He truly believes that his time on earth is up to the Lord, and he's not about to waste a single second worrying about things he can't control. Phil still lives the way he always has, out in the woods, far away from all the noise of the modern world. And while the rest of the world is glued to their phones and social media, Phil is out there living like it's the 80s, just the way he likes it. A lot of people assume that since Duck Dynasty ended back in 2017, Phil and his family just kind of disappeared. But that's not true. The Robertson family is busier than ever. And even though Phil is not a Hollywood guy, his impact is still being felt today. But what do you think about his heartbreaking health issues? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, subscribe, and check out the next one on your screen for more updates.